Welcome, everybody. We have a pretty amazing webinar planned for today. I know I say that every single webinar, but this one is blowing me away. When I read Alex Peng's book, Shorter, I was really excited about Alex Peng's book. I felt like it really showed that the hard work we've done at Third Path for over 20 years has been proven once again to be something that is going to be so valuable for everybody, for organizations, for families, for men, for women, people of all genders will benefit from the advice that Alex Peng shares in his book, Shorter. Briefly, I'm going to go over some slides to talk about what you'll learn about in Alex's book, and then Alex joins us to talk a little bit about what I've been sharing. But that's not all. We've also got two other exciting guests, because one of the things that Alex mentions in his book is when we change the workplace so that people have more time for their lives, and we do it in a way where the whole organization is thinking differently, it makes a big difference in men's lives. And so we have Ed Frauenheim, who will be joining us today to talk a little bit about that. He also mentions how a lot of the reasons why people thought about this is because it was a leader who was exhausted from overwork, who wanted to make a change, not just for the organization, but for their own lives. And so we have another wonderful guest, Ashley Ford, who will be joining us from Great Place to Work. And she'll be talking about real life experiences she's going through about putting these ideas into action, and how she's been really leading a charge to think differently with her team as well. So I'm super excited about what we have to share today. To make it really successful, I'm actually going to share a couple of slides with you that will help us explain how Alex's book is so deeply connected to Third Path and so smart, and something you should pick up and read as soon as possible. In short, we've been arguing that there is a science of work-life integration. And what that means is we've become a world where we could work everywhere all the time. But what Third Path has been doing, and what Alex's book shows us, is that when we become more intentional about creating time for our lives outside of work, we can actually become more effective at work. And this is something we've done for a long time, over 20 years. In fact, if you go to our free resource site and you search free Third Path resources, you'll see that we've put up a video case study where there's 3 examples of people who've applied these ideas: a dad, a team, and also one of our board members talks about how they've applied these ideas to their lives or their teams. You can also get a copy of our Third Path Leader Guide, which is a great example of how you can put these ideas into practice in your life as well, if you're just wanting to get started yourself. But today, we're going to talk about how some organizations are doing this and really doing things differently. And one of the phrases I liked about that Alex shared was that, it's not cramming 5 days of work into 4. Instead, these organizations were either going to go to a 4-day work week, maybe everybody had Friday off or Monday off or Wednesday off, or they were going to go to a 32-hour work week and everybody end their workday early. And to reach that goal, they started to look at how they could do work more efficiently. Or was there something that could be automated? Could they eliminate a task? Could they think together about what problem might they encounter by all not working Fridays, and plan ahead around how to navigate so that doesn't become a problem? And most importantly, what new cultural norms and behaviors were required for everybody in the organization to adopt this approach? And what I love also about Alex's book is he's helping us see this is a global movement. Yeah, he's researched 100 organizations, but I think he's made a really good point that this is the future. And if more organizations are figuring out how to do a 4-day work week successfully, guess what? People can leave their workplaces and work for those workplaces. So I think we're really going to see that this is a trend. 2 other points. He only looked at workplaces where they continued to pay employees at the same level, even though they were working 4 days instead of 5. That's because those organizations continued to earn at the same level and sometimes become more profitable. All right, so I hope you're getting excited. Again, I couldn't put it down. It was a real breath of fresh air, something again that Third Path believes in so deeply. What were some of the main points? And again, Alex and I will probably talk about these, is that you need to think about how to do work differently. Something Third Path has taught a long time is that you need to create regular focused work time and cut out a lot of meetings. You need to use technology better. He in particular talks about, project management tools or collaboration tools. And in general, we've learned at Third Path, like for example, learning how to turn off technology at the right time and not being tethered constantly to technology. You need to redesign workspace. Alex talks a lot about how this is done when you're in an office. And we'll talk a little bit today about how this also means remote work, because for a long time, we've learned sometimes employees way before the pandemic were working from home 1 day or 2 days a week as a way to get that focused work time. Point number 4, I think, is so great that he's included. It's recognizing that no matter how we land, what our workplaces look like 5 years from now, we need to include sociability. We need to include people connecting to each other. We took it for granted if we all went into the workplace 5 days a week and we were all there most days, that we would bump into each other and have sociability happen without us having to be intentional. But when you're trying to be effective at work, you don't want to rule out you also need to create sociability. So I hope Alex and I will talk more about that. And obviously, the whole book is talking about how leaders looked to employees to learn how to do this. This was not a top-down initiative. This was learning a group effort. And why do we want to do this? Why is it beneficial? Well, of course, he lists some pretty obvious and very important reasons. Improved performance, improved recruitment, decreased turnover. I hope we'll talk about boosted creativity. That's certainly something I've seen. But there's something much bigger. This is really about better for society. This is about making a more sustainable workplace for working parents. This is about making a more sustainable workplace for our aging population. This is about a better environment, decreasing commuting. This is about happiness and wellness. So this is a really powerful book with really powerful ideas. I hope one thing you take away today is even if you don't think your workplace is going to become a 4-day work week, there's a lot you can learn from this and apply in your own life. And we've got lots of tools at Third Path to help you get started. But I hope you'll be inspired to maybe become part of the movement moving towards a 4-day work week. So you're going to hear from Alex next. I hope you get the idea. I'm super excited about what he's done. He's very accomplished, written many books. He's now part of the 4-day week global workplace. But just as importantly, he's tried to figure out these ideas in his own life. And we had a wonderful discussion about how he's a dad, happily married, and really been trying to think about some of this work-life integration personally. So we're going to hear from Alex next. Hey, so glad you're here, Alex. So do you think I like your book a little bit?
Yeah, that was a very gratifying introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
You will, because again, what you've done is you've put your finger on a movement, and you've done your research, and you've really said it all very well. It's entertaining to read your book too, so it's not a boring book to read. So tell us a little bit about wherever you'd like to start. Is there something I didn't talk about, or is there something I've talked about that you want to underscore? And then we have a couple of points I want to hit.
Okay. I think that just as a tiny bit of explanation. So, I wrote the book about the 4-day week as a kind of sequel to sort of a book that I had done a couple years ago about the hidden role of rest. Actually, here it is, in the lives of really creative and prolific people. And one of the things that I was interested in after that book came out was, is it possible, to apply the lessons of that book at scale, right? Many of the people who I talked about in Rest were Nobel Prize winners or, famous authors or composers, people who had the ability to design their lives pretty much any way they wanted. And but what about people who work 9 to 5, or or the professionals who have clients, they have sort of demands on their day? Is this something, how do they bring more rest into their own lives? And that started me on sort of a research project that eventually landed on companies that have been moving to 4-day weeks without cutting salaries, without cutting expectations around productivity and so forth. And what they taught me was, first of all, two really important things. First, that in a sense, the 4-day week is already here. It's just buried underneath a whole bunch of bad practices around overly long meetings, around sort of poorly implemented technologies, around sort of distractions in the workplace. And indeed, there are studies that find that people lose something like 2 to 3 hours per day to meetings, distractions, interruptions, and that if you can get rid of those things, therefore, you go a long way to making it possible for everyone, for people to work to do 5 days worth of work in 4. The second thing was, it's not something that is part of some sort of vague, it's neither a nice to have nor something that's part of some vague future. It's actually already here. It's just something we've got to, we've got to do a little work to bring into existence. The other thing is the degree to which this is a collective enterprise, right? We tend to think of time savings or productivity improvements as things that are highly personal, right? That involve your interaction with your, it's like your eyes, brain, screen, and keyboard. And one of the things that this does is, I think, take our attention away from the ways in which organizational change and can help us to all be more productive, and much more profoundly, the way in which things like attention and focus have a deeply social, collaborative dimension to them. And over again, the companies that I've looked at have shown me that paying attention to that, to thinking of things like focus and attention and work-life balance as collective problems, as problems that we can solve together, offer a path forward that makes for, I think, better solutions, more robust solutions, and also ones that do not come with unintended downsides, right? It is one thing if you're the only person in your group who is working flexibly or working from home 1 day a week. It's something else entirely if everybody works together so that everyone can go home at the end of the day on Thursday and start their weekend. It turns these efforts to reclaim time, to get better work-life balance from things, from a kind of zero-sum game into a win-win. Those I think are a couple of the really big takeaways from the book. The accessibility of the 4-day week, and the fact that looking more to collective and organizational solutions to these problems has the kind of power to it that I think we underestimate at our peril, but if we can harness, yields really tremendous enduring results.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Thank you for underscoring all of that. I'm glad you raised those issues. And, no surprise, audience, as you're listening in, that, his work came from looking at rest. And it's very connected to what I wanted to talk about next, this idea about how it boosted creativity. And I'm sure those are all very connected, because I'll just give a quick personal story. I just took my first real vacation in 2 years because of the pandemic. When I mean vacation, real vacation, I mean a vacation where you really turn off work and you really go somewhere else that's very different, and you're engaged in this new place and exploring. And what happens inevitably for me when I'm doing this is my brain, without even trying to think about it, comes up with a brand new idea about how to solve something at work,
Mm-hmm.
inevitably. In fact, I came up with about 10 new ideas, and I had to like have an hour-long conversation with one of my team members when I got back, because I had so many cool ideas about, how we could do this smarter, how we could use some synergy there. And it was because I had stepped away, because I had turned things off, because I was in a new environment. I know that that's what happens when people have a little bit more time for life and they don't feel so stressed so think about it, you've created a whole organization that's got that better approach. Is that what you're seeing, Alex?
Absolutely. Something like 20% of startups in Silicon Valley are based on ideas that founders have when they're on a sabbatical or when they're on a vacation. So, and I think that in that sense, the business case for vacations or regular breaks is pretty easy to make. But it's also something that we can that we can realize and benefit from, not just every year or so, but also every day or every week. That one of the really interesting, most surprising things for me when I was writing Rest was seeing that super creative, prolific people often design days so that they're working really intensively for like 4 hours or so. Not much more than that, but they also build into their daily schedules a lot of time for working in the garden or going on long walks or doing things of that sort. And it turns out that what's going on there is that they're layering periods of really focused work and then what I call deliberate rest that serve, number one, to give mind and, often eyes a break from, whatever's on their, the stuff that they've been working on hard. So there is a kind of restorative element to it. But also, it turns out that, taking a break when you've been working really intensively on something gives your kind of creative subconscious space to continue turning over unsolved ideas, even while you're thinking about something else. So that the odds of having those kinds of, sort of sudden insights, those aha moments, when when you realize that, well, one way to solve this problem would be to sort of try this approach. The odds of having those during the day, having those every day, go up. And it sounds like a relatively small thing, but when when you're doing creative work, those kinds of small solutions can really add up to make a big difference in the quality of our work, in how insightful it is. Amos Tversky, one of the co-founders of behavioral economics, said, "People waste years because they won't waste hours." Which he meant, by which he meant, spending, taking that little extra time, sort of, to think a little bit more about a problem, or to turn it over while you are sort of on a walk. These are things that can help make the difference between doing an okay piece of work and doing work that changes the world that you can be really proud of. So so
wonderful. So I read this book. I'm thinking about a whole organization that's creating much more routine time to step away, reflect. Actually, one of the 10 zillion favorite points was how in technology, where the pace of change is so fast, actually kind of rejiggering the system where you're intensely working, you're working in 4 days, but then having that break for 3 days, actually is a better way to handle a fast-paced world, which I think is just probably why this is a global movement. I do want to pay attention to the time and make sure we talk about one other important thing. So you talk about redesigning sociability. I just think it's so profound that you figured out that one too, because people are really wrestling with this right now. They've gone from this assumption that too many people were like holding their breath that they would just go back to working on site 5 days a week and they just handle sociability by being present. And you guys are you're describing in your workbook in your book about how people are being intentional about time, creating focused work time, creating time that's more communal, meeting time, but you talk about sociability. How do you map that in, and what were some insights around why that's important and how they did that?
Sure. So it's important partly because an awful lot of our friendships are work-based, right? This is sort of, you go in, part of the reason we go into places that we like is to see people we like. And this is, and sort of companies that move to 4-day weeks very often worry about how you preserve like the social life of the office or work friendships. And it turns out that, this is, and their instinct that this is important is absolutely right. There was one company where the first month that they introduced a 4-day week, there were still a few people who were coming into the office Fridays, making one call and then disappearing. And it turned out that this was a crew that had not told their spouses that they were working a 4-day week. And so they were just spending the day together, which is a lovely illustration of how important those relationships mattered. But people sometimes come up with their own solutions. But what I see more commonly is companies designing their schedules to build in time for things like everybody having lunch together, or fika, the Swedish coffee break. And the idea here is that by doing this, not only do you create permission for people to spend time together and you've got some social time, it also means that you're not as apologetic about focusing in on work during those focus times, because you know that you'll be able to sort of socialize later. It means you get better quality of, or kind of deeper work, to invoke Cal Newport, but you also get better social time. And so having those boundaries, being unapologetic about them, creating an environment in which people can be sort of social when they want to be, and in an odd way can also be social about their focus. Sort of in the way that when you went to a library during finals, you could concentrate partly because everybody else was in there concentrating. Turns out, I think, to be an important part of sort of making the 4-day week work, making it something that doesn't undermine sociability, but also in a weird way, kind of harnessing sociability to enhance both the social life of the office, but also enhance sort of the focus and productive part of sort of office life as well.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a law firm, again, way before the pandemic, that was very progressive in their approach to thinking about, what we're talking about is bounded work time. And we're saying, setting better boundaries around work time. And one way they did that also was to be very intentional of using lunch times and lunch as a time for people to hang out and talk about anything besides work. And I remember talking to the partner where he said, it encourages people to have a life too, that he wants them to be more than just work, because it's actually going to make them better at work to not just be these robots thinking about work, but to have this expanded view that helps them think more creatively too. So I think it all adds up to a much better solution. There are so many more things we want to talk about, but I want to introduce our next couple of guests, because you've mentioned a point that is really so important. I wanted to bring a couple more people on to talk about it, which is that when you make this a collective enterprise, that it really changes the equation around people's needs to have a life. And in particular, I think it really changes things for men. Let's say you're a new dad and you want to have a day where you're in charge of your new baby and have a daddy day with your baby on Friday. You don't have to ask permission in a 4-day work week organization. You can just go ahead and have that Friday where you're solely in charge of the baby. And what we've really learned is when men are encouraged to have that one-on-one time with their children, it just changes the relationship of that family and all of the relationships going forward. So we're going to get into how this is a profound change for families and leaders next. So where we're going next, I'm going to be introducing a couple more guests who will talk about these issues. if you've been listening in this year, you've been hearing over and over about if we want to live integrated lives, it's partly about what we've been talking about, capacity, how much we can get done with work, and in this case, a 4-day work week, how much can we get done in 32 hours? But it's also about flexibility, when and where you can work. And that the two together help us then be able to design lives where you have time for work and time for these other things that are in this diagram that I'm showing you. And, this is in direct confrontation with some concepts about what the ideal worker used to look like. The ideal worker always put work first. And so we're saying, nope, there's a new ideal. And to get to this new ideal worker, what we've learned is it's partly what Alex and I have been talking about, how we can do work differently and create organizations that support everybody to do work differently and how profound that is. But it's also about doing family differently, because there's still some very strong gender norms about what men are supposed to do when a baby's born, what women are supposed to do, what all genders have some strong norms around what they're supposed to do when along comes a baby. And as you're going to hear from another one of our guests, it's also really thinking differently about what leaders can do. The assumption was leaders, to move into a position of leadership, you had to just say yes, yes, yes to everything that came your way and work ridiculous hours. And really what Alex saw while researching his book was that, leaders want this change too. I certainly know I'm a leader who wanted to live a more integrated life. And so, we've been at this work for a long time, as I said, and we saw some patterns around what helps create engaged fatherhood. And what I could see was, an organization that encourages people to work a 4-day work week really helps with these issues. It creates a routine time where you can have a daddy day in charge of the kids. It encourages in a 2-parent household that both parents can really be involved with family responsibilities. You skip down the list a little bit. It provides lots of role models. You see other men in your organization who are working a 4-day work week and having a daddy day. And you have managers who are saying, hey, I want to help you stick to that 4-day work week. In fact, I would argue that, this whole enterprise that you've joined, let's say you've joined it before you've had kids, helps you start getting a new value system where you understand work is part of my life, but not all of my life. And that's going to help you all the way through your life, this integrated mindset. And one more fact from Alex's book before we hear from Ed Frauenheim and we hear from Ashley Ford, that, this is about us being happier. This is about creating a world where we're not so exhausted. There was many examples he provided about why this increases happiness. But the one I picked out was a very specific study of 636 diverse employees and some really great outcomes that were found from following these employees who went to a 75% schedule and what they discovered about themselves 9 months later. The one I want to really emphasize is that something I've seen at Third Path for a long time working with families, when you're not having work take up so much of your life, and in a 2-parent household, both parents having work take up so much of their time and energy, those tasks that can sometimes feel exhausting become actually enjoyable. So hanging out with your kid after school, making cookies, going to a t-ball game and actually, watching, being able to cook dinner in a relaxed way without everybody hungry. It really does change the equation for families when we don't have work demand so much of our time. So who we're going to hear from next? He's been on one of our webinars before. He'll be on many more in the future. I love Ed. He's written a fabulous book. You can listen to some of the recordings we've had where we've had Ed on calls before. But he's written a great book about reinventing masculinity. If you're excited about this concept, join us again next month because we will be having Ed as part of our annual Father's Day town hall. So Ed's going to be joining us. And I just met for the first time Ashley Ford. She is going to blow you away too. She works at Great Place to Work, an executive there, and she is a new parent. So she's our real-time expert on what it means to try to think about how to live an integrated life. So they will be joining us now to talk a little about some of these concepts that we've been talking about. And in particular, wow, I forgot to have that in the slide where I missed it. It's the idea that we're going to get rid of the possibility of a penalty for people who want to work a more reduced schedule and have time for life, and how that will change things for fathers, and how that changes things for leaders. All right, wonderful. Hey, Ed and Ashley. So I'm sure you're super excited about what Alex and I have been talking about, and now we get a chance to really connect this to fathers and why some of these ideas will be profound for fathers in particular. And after we hear from you, Ed, we get to hear from Ashley and think about how all of this really connects to what she's experienced as a leader at a wonderful workplace. So Ed, how does this play out for fathers, these ideas?
Thanks, Jessica. And I just want to credit Alex for writing a great book. I haven't read the whole thing yet. I tried to get it at my local bookstore. It was sold out. But just your conversation and some of the highlights I've heard about make me really excited about it. I think one of the first big impacts that Alex's book and that the concept of a 4-day work week have for men is that it really helps men build on the lessons of the pandemic. And you were speaking about it in that last statistic, but there's been some research that finds that men have been increasing their caregiving over the last couple of years, partly because they've been working at home with the pandemic, shutting so many businesses down or having people work remotely. And that's been changing men. It's been making men more interested in being caregivers, in playing a more active role at home. And so I think that is something that the 4-day work week sort of builds on, or it allows us to kind of keep going with. And sort of the reason why that's so important, I think, is that really it's freeing up men. It's giving men permission to live a fuller life, to put it kind of plainly. A lot of guys, I think, would be afraid of asking for that extra time off, like you're saying, the penalty, Jessica. What Alex has identified really gives men permission to just take that time off and not fear they have to, act the tough guy, the I'm the hardest worker here guy, which is a pressure that a lot of men have felt historically, but rather allows them to go home and build up some of these newer roles that are emerging for men, like caregiver, like someone who is going to be more focused on the community, community service type activities, and also hear their calling. Like there may be ways that, like Alex was saying, new ideas pop into folks' heads when they have that greater time for rest. So men can really expand on what we call a confined masculinity in the book you showed before, Jessica, and kind of find themselves having a richer life in these various dimensions at home, but potentially in the community and even in ways they might not even have thought about so far.
Yeah, well said. I love everything that you said. Building on the pandemic, giving them permission to live a fuller life. I think my husband would be the first one to say this crazy integrated path that we've followed for 30 plus years as parents has led him to a life where, he just couldn't have imagined what it would have been if he had followed the more traditional path for men as the provider who went off to work every day and really did not have the kind of very involved, very connected relationships he has with our children, and how that's evolved into us both being equally capable of caring for our aging parents. And us being able to create our lives together, design our lives together as two adults who are both thinking about wanting careers, but also wanting to enjoy life, because it goes by pretty quickly. There might be one more comment you want to say about how much there's an opportunity for men in doing things differently. And then I want to hear from Ashley about how this sounds for leaders. Any other thoughts about why this is so important for men?
Yeah, I'll just make a personal comment along the lines of the statistic you showed about the enjoyable nature of tasks, because I've really kind of redesigned my life in the last year and a half, you might say, to make more space for the non-work. And one of the things I've noticed is that I now enjoy cooking, and I never really enjoyed cooking. And my wife might challenge that statement, but at least I enjoy cooking with her. And so last night, for example, we made a tuna casserole with like 7 ingredients. Like that's way more than I normally would be comfortable with. Peppers and onions and mushrooms. I made a roux. I mean, that's ridiculous. I made a roux. And so I think I'm personally seeing what used to be a chore and something I would stress over. I would feel guilty that I hadn't cooked. I would only want to make something out of a can. Now with that greater space, that greater amount of time for non-work, I am finding it to be a source of joy. So I imagine that I sound like I'm part of this wider group that's experiencing that based on Alex's research. So I can personally attest to the power of creating more time for life beyond work.
Yeah, and given that you are a creative person, I'm only going to imagine how much this is going to help you in the creative work that you bring to the world too. So wonderful, Ed. This is all good for us. Ashley, we're so glad you're here. You are a real time experiencing these issues. Where would you like to begin? You want to tell us a little bit about, how it's working well, some insights you've had? Where would you like to begin? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess, just similar to Ed, Alex, I haven't had a chance to fully read your book yet, but just what I've kind of heard, through what you've shared here and some other videos I've watched before, this resonates with me so much. And it's really kind of serendipitous how I was kind of going through a cycle, myself of kind of feeling drained and and just like, that I'd gotten to the point again where I had a lot on my plate and I sort of needed to reevaluate what I was going to keep doing. And everything that you've shared, really, really hit home for me. So, I think as a leader and just as a real-time learner of what it means to have kind of a more integrated life, I think the biggest kind of takeaway that I've learned, is that it's an ongoing process and cycle. You never get to the point, where it's like, okay, I've achieved this full integration and everything is perfectly balanced. It is a constant kind of reevaluation and really like at this point where it's like, okay, things are going good. I have space, and so therefore I start taking on more work, and then I get to the point again to where I've got a lot on my plate, and so it's this constant like reevaluation that you have to do. But I would say, the biggest learning and kind of motivator for me is truly, as you're saying, like both experiencing kind of a happy, more fulfilling life myself outside of work, and at the same time doing so while achieving the most success that I've ever had in my career. I tell my colleagues over and over again, I'm constantly blown away at just the growth we've experienced, at the records we break all the time. And and so it's not one without the other, that it's like you can have both, and what I've experienced, I think, kind of the biggest truth or lie that I was telling myself before, was how involved I had to be in everything that we were doing at work, in order for us to be successful. And coming into motherhood and becoming a parent, or so I guess I could say that really kind of fueled my workaholic, tendencies before, and it certainly was a thing that allowed me to achieve success as an individual contributor. But I could tell, it wasn't going to be sustainable in really a leadership role. So becoming a mother and knowing like I don't have infinite time to work the way that I did before, number one, forced me to kind of put boundaries around my work day. But as you're saying, I also like realized I could get a lot more done in that, just regular 8-hour day. And the things that I couldn't get done became the opportunities for my team to develop themselves. And so I had this like huge aha moment that like, while I felt like I was helping everyone, being in all the places and making it to where we were going to achieve this level of success, I was also hindering the growth of all of those around me. So I think, kind of and I can see it today. There are fewer and fewer things on my team. I have a team of 20 people right now, so it's impossible for me to be in everything that they're doing. But every single day, we're all kind of reaching new heights together because of this growth that we experience at the same time. And I would say, I know 100%, it has a lot to do with the fact that like I just am less available. I'm less available for them, more available for my family than I was in the past.
And we, when we first met, actually, you heard me use my little phrase, because I know the two sides of your coin. One is team at work, and the other is team at home. And what Ashley's talking about, if you want to be an integrated leader, and this is what we talk about in the Third Path Leader Guide, you need a good team at work. And that's what Ashley learned, is I can rely more on my team, and actually they are willing to step up, and they're going to do sometimes even better than I could have thought of myself. And, we won't have time to go into it today, but Ashley also has a great team at home. And so it is that combination of being able to really rely on people other than yourself that allows her to, she says she's had success in both. That is possible because she's put a good team in place at work, and she's got a great team at home. And that's how I've done it. That's how we've seen the other leaders in the Third Path community do it. It really makes a difference. So where I want to go next, if time is flying, is I'm going to have Alex come back on screen. So we'll take a second and put Alex back on screen. Great. We're at a point where we can talk a little bit more about how all this connects. And I had a thought a direction I'd like to go, kind of thinking about all these things together, partly because one of my community members asked me a great question about flexibility and 4-day work weeks. So I want to ask about flexibility and 4-day work weeks in a second. But Alex, you've been listening into what Ed and Ashley said. There might be something you're dying to say first before we go to the question I had for us.
Well, I think it's it's absolutely the case that the 4-day week makes a huge difference in the lives of parents, and equally for for fathers as well as mothers. I think in terms of the shifts in careers, there are things that the 4-day week allows for working mothers that are unique. Working dads just haven't had the sorts of career challenges. But otherwise, I think I think also that a number of the companies that I have studied talked about how working moms were often the ones who demonstrated that it was possible to actually do a 4-day week, right? That they were in a sense the early adopters who who showed that very often under quite challenging circumstances, if you were ruthless about your time, you really prioritized, that this was that you could do this. They became, they went from, in a sense, these kinds of marginal figures to exemplars for everybody. And I think that's one of the really amazing things that that happens within these within these companies. I'll stop there.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad we have that in today's recording, because hats off to all those moms who went ahead and did this despite the incredible obstacles that they faced, and showed us that they could work smarter. And we're the earliest pioneers of some of these ideas. Thank you, Alex, for bringing that up. It's such a really good point. Thank you. So what I wanted to go to, and this will be the question I ask while we're waiting from our audience, if you guys want to ask a question, because believe it or not, we're getting to the last 10 minutes of our webinar. And so you might have a question, you'll put it in the chat. Sergio is going to look for your question, and then he'll ask our question, and you can ask it to a specific person today, or you can ask it to us generally. But while we're waiting for those questions, I had a thought. Alex, I was thinking about that 4-day, let's pretend it's an organization that had the Fridays off. Mm-hmm. And, you know, along comes Thursday, and you suddenly have that completely unexpected life experience that happens. And so you don't need to take the whole day off, but you know you need to take half the day off to take care of this very unexpected life event. I have some theories about how they approached that. How is it like, for example, at Third Path, we allow people to time shift. They could say, hey, I can't do it today, but I'm going to do those 4 hours Friday afternoon, or I'm going to do them 2 hours tonight and 2 hours Sunday. We let them time shift or take PTO. Did you have much data on that, and how they handled flexibility, I guess, is the bigger question.
Right. I think the simple answer is most places don't seem to have to construct a new kind of policy different from the one that they had sort of previously. I think that the fact that you also have a full day of the week for what the Brits called life admin, right? Scheduling appointments, having the new refrigerator delivered, etc., means that the odds, the number of times when you've got to take time off from work actually goes down, which in a way makes it easier to deal with the genuinely unexpected stuff. So I think it's not a really mysterious, it's not this incredibly complicated logistical thing. I think you deal with it humanely, and you'll get a good outcome.
Yeah. Well, so they're pretty creative, and they've probably come up with some creative ways to understand that, sometimes you can't schedule those things for a Friday. What comes to mind, for example, is elder care, very unpredictable, hard to schedule around, and that they will have policies that help around the flexibility side, given what their organization has been doing in the past around flexibility. So I just want the audience to remember, there is flex that families need sometimes, and then there is capacity management, how much work we can handle. And that will continue even in a 4-day work week place. They need to have some solutions. And Alex is saying they're using the solutions they've always used, and they're creative people. Wonderful. Sergio, I'm listening in. There might be a question for us or for one of our audience members or all of us. Any questions out there for us, Sergio?
We have a question.
Great.
The question says, I wonder how we might set up support for single employees who have different responsibilities outside of work, but whose time is often viewed as expendable.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to jump right in. Alex, I know you want to say the same thing. The beauty of a 4-day work week is single people get the 4-day work week. Parents get the 4-day work week. Everybody gets the 4-day work week. And so it stops being about this debate between, do we give parents more flexibility? It's everybody's got more time. Alex, what else would you want to add to that point? I think that's the beauty of the 4-day work week. Everybody has needs for life. And so this makes it an everybody solution. Alex, what would you add?
No, I would add nothing, because I think you've said sort of what's most important. And indeed, there are cases. There are companies where you've got a mix of people who have sort of young kids. Some others have elderly parents, and all of them report that they are better able to sort of deal with their with the personal responsibilities that come from those two different roles. So.
Yeah. The one interesting twist that's worth mentioning, and Sergio, you might have another question for us. In Alex's books, he did talk about that there were some people who didn't like the 4-day work week. And I don't know if this is a good way of describing it, but maybe sometimes people in their 20s, felt like there was a social side of work, that having it happen over 5 days in a more spacious way felt like it was kind of more the rhythm of how they wanted to live their lives. And so there are going to be some people who kind of like the other style of working. We're not saying this is the be all and end all, but as far as a single person wanting time for life, this is a good option for you. Alex, what about that? Some people don't like it.
Some people don't like it at first. Most people do figure out figure out how to that there's an upside to this. I think especially when you see everybody else doing it, you start to wonder, why am I coming in on Fridays? Now, for people who are new to their professions, I think that there is an argument you can make that in the period when you're still kind of learning not just the details of your job, but you're learning how to be a particular kind of professional, right? What it means to serve clients, et cetera, that there's a lot of tacit knowledge that may be easier to absorb in a more conventional work week, but that once you have learned that, one of the things that you should be able to do when you're a more skilled and knowledgeable worker is to be able to make better choices about how you spend your time, to do certain things more effectively. And therefore that you should see, being able to move to a shorter week as proof of your professionalism, as opposed to, and this indeed was, an idea that most professionals had a couple generations ago, right? If you were, a seasoned attorney would not need as long to review a document as someone who is fresh out of law school, for example. And I think it's something that we have kind of forgotten in our assumption that long hours are a good thing, full stop, no matter what, no matter who you are. So
yeah, wonderful. There might be kind of a life cycle approach to some of this stuff too. So I can't believe it, we're down to the last 3 minutes. So Ed and Ashley, think about what closing insight you want to share. I'm going to put a couple of slides up, and then I ask you for one closing thought or insight. So what an amazing discussion today. What an amazing book. What an amazing group of people. If you want to continue the conversation, we are excited about our Trailblazers community. You can join us on Facebook. We'll be continuing today's discussion there with some questions, with some sharing of resources. So you don't have to just wait for our Thursday webinars to get smart. You can join us on our Trailblazing community. Ed, thank you so much for being a champion for fathers and men. What's one last big insight you want to have and share with us? And then we'll hear from Ashley.
Men have long defined themselves largely as providers. And I think what this conversation today offers is a way to redefine that part of our identities. And I love this idea that with more rest, with more time beyond work, we can actually have a richer, fuller life. So it really is time to redefine ourselves as providers, as employees, and to consider some newer ways.
Wonderful, Ed. Well said. Ashley, again, thank you for being the real-time person that people are going to relate to, wrestling with these issues. What's one last insight you want to share?
I think, really just kind of underscoring what Alex just shared, about how, kind of how we learn early in our careers and how we might be telling ourselves stories that like we have to work all day long, in order to kind of catch up and to speed up this process of learning and to get that next promotion. I wish I had understood this concept better, 10 years ago, because as a person who experienced extreme burnout twice, and really couldn't make it past, I think 3.5 years was the longest time I had stayed at an organization prior to coming to Great Place to Work. And I thought, that it was something that was wrong with me, that I really just couldn't cut it in these environments that I was put in, and that somehow I didn't belong, but knowing what I know now, it really was, I didn't know how to create boundaries. I didn't know how to take care of myself. And I also didn't have leaders that were modeling that for me either, so it's really, I think, both, something as a single, person, as a young person. This is important to learn early in your career too. Absolutely, that it's important to have a life outside of work, and for you to not be allowing yourself to be so expendable like I was, because it doesn't, in my experience, like, yes, you get a promotion here and there, but it's not long-term sustainable either. So really to get the kind of
Amen.
growth, that we're all hoping for, I encourage you to kind of take this into practice now.
Yeah, well said. Amen. Well said. As promised, Alex, one last thought for our listeners today.
Sure. I have heard Ashley's story probably a few hundred times now in, the sort of founders who move their companies to 4-day weeks often do so after a brush with burnout or, recognition that they've got to make some dramatic changes to their company if the company is going to thrive, and they're going to thrive. Likewise, in rest, most of the people who discover deliberate rest do so the hard way, right? They have some kind of health crisis or something that makes them reevaluate and reassess. And so I think that the positive in that is that no matter how smart you are, you have to figure this stuff out for yourself. But also that it is never, even if you, but it's never too late to discover the value of rest for yourself and for your organization. That's where I'll leave it.
It's never too late. It's never too late to go buy Alex's book, read it, to check out our free resources and use them. You have a whole Third Path community that wants to help you make the change you want to make today. So join us on the Trailblazers discussion. Thank you, everybody. This has been super, really wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.